Regierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
Hitler had an idea that the Germans were the superior race, that he needed to give them enough space to reproduce pure Aryan children. This would lead him down the path to start World War II. This would lead to many after effects, like the destruction of Europe, millions dead, hunger, unemployment, NATO, and the Eastern Bloc of Soviet oppression states. 1914, World War I starts. It would take 4 years for the war to end. World War I left the German Empire in ruins. As of 1918, on the 11th month, on the 11th day, of the 11th hour, the German Empire surrendered. The war left the German Empire broken. Uprisings happened everywhere, but in 1919, the German Empire signed the humiliating Treaty of Versailles, marking its loss of territory and pay money it didn't have, and amid the war was their fall. Put in place of the German Empire was the ill-equipped Weimar Republic. For already having to pay money to allies, inflation rose inside the country. As in 1923, $1 was worth 4 billion German marks. Bread prices quickly went up. People lined up everywhere to get free food from wherever they could. Banknotes and savings were now worthless. People went to collect their paychecks in wheelbarrows now. Money was so worthless that children played with stacks of it. With inflation rising, all the government could do was print more money. One woman burnt money instead of keeping it to stay warm during the cold. With Germany not being able to pay its debt off, the French occupied the Ruhr in 1923, an industrial area on the Rhine River. They took resources from the area to pay off the debt, which further crippled Germany's economy. Posters went up telling the people to not work. A total of 130 German civilians died during the occupation. At this time, Germans were at a civil unrest, leading them to be hypnotized by one man's idea. The Nazi Party was like your ordinary right-wing German party. They would meet in beer halls, but the thing that made them different was their leader, Adolf Hitler. Hitler was a man that could speak and excite a crowd, but he believed Jews and communists were evil, and Jews were nothing but rats. In 1923, Hitler tried a coup in Munich to take power, but failed and was sentenced to 5 years in prison, where he only spent 9 months. In jail, he wrote his autobiography called Mein Kampf, meaning My Struggle. In the book, he writes on anti-Semitism, politics, and life. Like all right-wing parties, the Nazis had a paramilitary organization, built up mostly by young men. They mostly beat rival parties, protected Hitler while he talked, and beat Jews. Nazis often protested Jewish stores and would sometimes beat people who bought from them. Slowly but surely, with more Germans being annoyed and wanting something new, they turned to Hitler's idea of a pure Aryan race. In 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor by President Hindenburg under increased pressure, but disaster struck about a month later. Historians debate if the Nazis did it themselves, but the government building, the Reichstag, was set ablaze. One thing to know was Hitler was seen visibly distressed and annoyed after the fire. A decree was sent out the day following that all rival parties and enemies of Hitler were to be sent to the newly constructed concentration camps in Dachau, the first of many. The following year, President Hindenburg died, letting the Nazis be in full power. By this time, the whole of the German people pledged their allegiance to Hitler. The years following were years of spitting on Jews. Crude pictures of them were drawn of them. One of these were from the German magazine Der Stürmer. Many Jews lost their jobs and property. What was the nail in the coffin for Jews living in Germany were the controversial Nuremberg laws, which came out in 1935, which said 3 things. Germans and Jews were prohibited from marrying, Jews could not have intercourse with Germans, and pretty much stating you are no longer a citizen of the state. The Nacht der offenen Glas, the night of broken glass, or Kristallnacht, was a night of terror where homes were broken into, Jews lynched, homes stolen from in 1938. With most people not knowing or being fine of the killing of the Jews, they believed in Hitler as a leader. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria and parades through it. An unknown fact is that Austria was used as a playground of violence on the Jews, and the rest of the world sits on in silence. In the following months, Hitler demands the Sudetenland, a land full of ethnic Germans, part of the country of Czechoslovakia. A meeting is held with the Allies, and an agreement comes forth. that Hitler will not invade the rest of Czechoslovakia, ensuring peace in our time. A separate deal was set between Neville Chamberlain and Hitler, stating Hitler will not invade England. A year later, Hitler invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. Now, the German Reich demands Danzig, a former part of the German Empire. Poland refuses the ultimatum. With Poland refusing and being in a defensive alliance with Britain and France, Germany banks on that France will not invade from behind, and Operation West kicks off on September 1st, 1939. The invasion of Poland begins. By the 28th, the Poles capitulate, and Warsaw was under their control. With the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact being established with the Germans and the Soviets, this is what the borders of Eastern Europe now look like. Then came a 9-month period known as the Phony War, where no one attacked. Then, in 1940, sea invasions and air invasions of Norway and Denmark began. Denmark would fall in 6 hours, while Norway took to June 10th for them to lay down arms. Then came France and the lowlands. Luxembourg, Netherlands, Belgium all came crumbling down. In the month after the invasion, the Wehrmacht was in Paris. And 2 weeks later, the French were reduced to nothing but a puppet state. The thing is, the French army was superior to the Germans in many ways, but the French High Command believed the war would be a rerun of the First World War, which would lead to their downfall. Then came the Balkans as the Axis swept through Yugoslavia and Greece. By 1941, this is what the Axis now looked like. Operation Barbarossa began in mid-1941, the main goal of the Reich, but what they didn't know, it was doomed to begin with. The final solution was the plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe by any means necessary. After a conference in 1942, many more concentration camps were built, but these were for killing, not holding. In the occupied Soviet areas, the Germans had a mobile killing unit, going from behind the army to kill Jews in the area. Many of these units were volunteer groups, which showed how the Nazis were able to infect people with the idea of a pure race. People were forced to leave their homes to live in a 5-mile disease-ridden homes. These were the main ghettos all in Eastern Europe, and the big ones in Poland. Auschwitz was one of the main concentration camps. Arat Mefre, where work set you free, was the motto. People arrived every day, and every day families were separated. Most never saw each other again, and people were forced to wear prison clothes and sleep next to where most of the people died, in the gas chambers. Normal people, kids, babies, and the medically challenged were all killed for doing nothing. And the chief of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, even came to Auschwitz to visit, and like all other Nazis, saw no problem with killing thousands. Before its liberation, another 1,000 died. Even though Hitler killed millions, the propaganda painted him as a god. By 1942, these were all the countries Germany had invaded. Maybe it was the loss at Stalingrad that doomed him. Maybe it was the invasion of Italy, or maybe it was D-Day that finished them up. But I believe Operation Barbarossa was doomed to the start. By 1945, the Soviets had encircled Berlin. Maybe it was the fear of revenge by the bloodthirsty Soviets, or maybe he had enough of it. But on April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life with his wife and dog in Führer Bunker, marking the end of his reign of terror, and just 8 days later, the Germans surrendered. In 1945, this is what the Jewish population now looked like after Hitler's quest. On May 7th, 1945, the last of the Wehrmacht laid down their guns. By this time, people celebrated the end of the war. If I told you one man's belief could destroy a continent, would you believe me? Hitler's twisted idea of Germans being the superior race led to 45 million dead, Europe left to rubble, hunger, unemployment, and left it in such a mess that the Soviets could set up the Eastern Bloc to torment Eastern Europeans, and would lead to the Cold War, which almost destroyed the world. Yes, indeed, one man's belief led to this.